You're listening to Black Parents Aging, where we help you navigate caring for aging loved ones. Every Wednesday, we'll discuss how to help your parents successfully navigate this new season of life. We are going to talk about legal, health, technology, and finances. Here's your host attorneys, Olivia Smith and Nicola Robinson.
So we're back with part two. We still have my client now, my good friend, Kim, who is talking to us about what has transpired in the last couple of years with her father that has led her to do some estate planning in as well. So if you listen to part one, you already kind of know the foundation and how Kim and her father managed to get to Georgia and how she ultimately becomes our client. So she's laid the foundation. So welcome back, Kim.
Hey.
Good to have you back. So we left off with you and your dad packing it up from Brooklyn, New York in the middle of the pandemic because he had gotten a diagnosis of Lewy body dementia and he was progressing, and you decided, okay, he needed something else in terms of his environment. So you were able to get a house built here, and then you guys make it to Georgia. So we're going to pick up right there. Okay, what happens once y'all get to Georgia? People have been dying to know.
So it was actually vascular.
Vascular, okay.
Yes. So we get to Georgia, and so at this point, my oldest sister joins me in the process. You know, actually, both sisters. I have two sisters, and both of them helped me in the process of moving down. The oldest one, she came for a period of about 3 weeks when we were moving. And the minute she stepped in, she said, no, there's no way that this is going to work with you. Because my idea for my dad was bringing in caregivers every day while I went out to work.
Okay.
So that kind of was my plan. Like, okay, I'd bring in somebody every day to kind of be his daytime caregiver while I was at work. And, they wouldn't have much to do because he still was, as long as you fed him lunch, he was still kind of on his own. So, my sister made a decision that wasn't feasible because of the current workforce with caregivers at this time. It's, they would cancel, it just wasn't working out. They would cancel, it wouldn't be the same person. Some people he liked and some people he didn't. Most are not trained in dementia, which is interesting. And outside of that, it just wasn't sustainable. It wasn't feasible to do, which, I was very disappointed. I built this whole house for him to be here and to live here, and spent about, I don't know, it took about maybe a year or 18 months to pull the trigger on this. So, it was disappointing, but, in the grand scheme of things and looking back, yeah, it was the best answer. So my sister immediately went into research mode. She went out, she saw all these homes, and then she came back. Here's my final 3. You go look at them and pick.
So you had somebody to even try to help you navigate that part.
Right. I don't think I would ever
like
have
a database or rankings or anything that you could just go to, right?
No.
So now you have to do boots on the ground.
A lot of people think about a place for mom, but I'll tell you this, a place for mom will refer who they get referral fees from, and it's always not the best place. So they'll leave great places out, which I believe the place that we ended up going, they weren't on a place for mom. So she got boosted around.
Who are listening or don't know, a place for mom is just a resource. It's online. You can Google it, and they have different assisted living facilities or different nursing home facilities on there. But their system on how facilities gets on there, they dictate. And so I don't know if it's paid. I don't know if it's referrals. We don't know. But Kim is simply saying that she realized there were facilities in Georgia that weren't on there. They weren't listed. And so she could have missed out on them just because they weren't listed on that resource.
Correct. So yeah, my sister went boots on the ground. She found a few homes, about probably eight of them. She went to visit them, gave me a list and said, go visit these, pick the ones you like. You pick the one you like and we'll take that there. So that was another whole thing. And, so we negotiated the fee, which was substantially cheaper than anything in New York.
Okay.
like substantially. So that was a plus, to it. So I picked a home from the one that she gave me, and from there, that was another whole Pandora's box, because now I had to learn how to navigate the home and the home process, and workers in there, and it kind of feels like, when you're looking for relief from this situation, it kind of feels like, oh great, now I can go and live my life. But no, you're managing the home as well.
So talk about it, because somebody is probably listening right now thinking, okay, I got to put them in a home, or I got to put her in a home because
Hmm.
I'm never going to be able to get my life back. Explain what the day to day now becomes when they are in a facility.
Yeah.
And now,
So,
and again, this is just assuming we're not going to stick them there and close the door and never
right,
look. This is still care about this person. I still want to make sure that they are getting the best resources.
right. So that's going to also depend on how your loved one is. Are they still mostly independent? Which, when I took my dad into the home, he was mostly independent. You could just drop some food off. He'd feed himself. He was able to go to the bathroom on his own. It was all, he was okay for the most part. I could call and rely on his information on, are you okay? Yes, I'm okay. I'm doing good. One thing that did help me in this process was he was further along in his dementia, and so far that he did not realize that we had moved.
Okay. So
So, yeah. So that was a
well, he
whole,
didn't know it was Georgia. He didn't even know it was a facility. He's just kind of like, we're
yeah.
here.
So, I mean, I guess the home that we picked had similarities to
Okay.
our home that we came from. I mean, to my eyes, it was clearly not, but to his eyes, he's thinking that he's in our old house in Detroit.
Okay.
So that was to my advantage. So, as long as they kind of fed him, he was okay. So he didn't need a lot of interaction, or he didn't need any of that. So they just made sure he ate, and that was it. As the disease progressed, and I'm noticing things about him, I'm noticing, at one point I'm like, his behavior is different. But one thing I had learned is that one of the first things when your parent is sort of getting out of sorts, if they're on medication, one of the first things you want to do is check for a UTI. This is
Mm,
around the time that I learned that. So he had ended up being in the hospital for being he fell. That's what happened. He fell, and turns out he had a UTI.
that wouldn't be obvious. It wouldn't be
Right.
like, Dad fell. Check for this UTI, urinary tract infection. For those who don't know, how do these two things even go together? Like
Right.
nobody just immediately come to those two. Oh, that might be the issue.
Right. So that happened a couple times while he was in the home. Toward the end, the last one of his last hospital visits, I took him to the hospital this time. Because they thought that he had pneumonia, and it was a long story, but they took him to the hospital, and so now I'm in the emergency room with him. The other times I wasn't there, but this particular time I was. So the hospital kind of was like, well, we don't see anything wrong with him, and I'm like, well, did you check for UTI? And they're like, we didn't. I'm like, okay, well, you need to do that because he's elderly with dementia, and that's typically something you would check for. The doctor was very, very combative with me. He insisted it was not a UTI, and that doesn't happen on a regular basis, and that wouldn't explain his behavior. So I insisted on a test for UTI at the hospital, and the minute that test came back, I never saw that doctor again. He did have a severe urinary tract infection. So I think, one thing that I think it's important to say is that make sure, even if there's no suspicion of that, make sure that hospitals check for that, because I had to really fight this particular doctor to ensure that my dad had the test that he needed for this urinary tract infection that he had. But rewinding back a little bit, so my dad was okay. He was getting what he needed in the beginning of his journey, but as he started to need more, I noticed that the staff was less and less trained in those areas. So,
Mm.
so we went probably a year that we were good. And then after that, I would say there's a time period where he stopped getting out of the bed.
Okay.
So no one really kind of gave me the heads up that, no one could get him out. I was assuming he was getting out. I was able to talk to him over an Alexa. So in the meantime, he had forgotten how to use his phone, so things were happening. He was progressing, but it was very small. And so that's when, the monitoring of the staff kind of kicked in because, I used to ask them, did you change him today? No, because at this point he needed changing. He needed more help with his activities of daily living. So, with brushing his teeth, with bathing, and as he needed more help, I'm noticing that it wasn't necessarily being done. So it was important for me to always step in and, just show up unannounced, and just kind of keep up with what was going on. Hold on. So yeah, that's when I had to really start looking at the staff. Were they actually doing this stuff and basic things like changing him, making sure he brushed his teeth, making sure he ate every day. My dad was not one to really, ask for help or, he didn't go down to the dining hall. So no one was really minding his everyday. So that's when it becomes important to check on your loved one every day. Just show up, make sure that they're getting the things that they're supposed to get. So as my dad needed more, the home was less able to provide it for him. And the home was also less trained in that. So
So did you have to look into credentialing and all that other stuff? Because I know the laws are different in every single state. What is required in terms of the staff, the day-to-day staff? Do they have to go through any type of training? Does the facility need to have any type of certifications and all that stuff? And so it can be real gray as to what they really actually need in terms of making sure that these staff members have gone through some type of training and education. It's one thing to just sit with someone as they're aging. It's another thing to deal with someone who is dealing with a disease. So talk about that. Talk about like what you've observed with the staff people.
yeah, so from my sister's research, she found out a bunch of stuff about, what's required by the state, including some of the training and what they're supposed to know and, how many times they're supposed to be changed, all of these things she vetted. Now, I was told that they were trained in dementia and they knew, kind of how to navigate that. But as as I'm there, I'm seeing that I'm training the staff at a certain point to say, to show, hey, this is kind of how you deal with these types of, behaviors.
Mhm.
Or walk away for 10 minutes and he's not even going to remember that this interaction happened and now you're getting a different person. That was interesting in that aspect. So there is a certain amount of training that they have, but in aging, I found that every person's aging journey is very different. So, you're not aware of what you're going to need until you land at that doorstep. And, we rely on places like facilities to kind of help guide that. But what we will find out and what I ultimately found out is that, you know, that level of worker is just kind of non-existent in the space. So, just like any other, workforce, they're having a lot of problems filling those jobs in those areas. So what ends up happening is it's high turnover.
Mhm.
So, I could probably name 50 different, staff members that I dealt with during the time that my dad was in this particular home. But no, not everybody's trained. You may be told that, but the training, like I felt that I was teaching them on how to deal with dementia in many cases. So
So he's in the facility. So what's the time frame now? What just kind of help everybody guide through this? Because are we out of COVID at this point? Are you able to visit? Are there people coming in and out? Like, just tell us where we are.
he went into the home so I moved to Georgia in July of 2021.
Okay.
So he went to the home in 2021, August. So now we're in 2022. So I wouldn't say out of COVID, really. but because he did get COVID in that year. So
Okay.
that was another whole thing. The home had a COVID outbreak. So I would just hope for the best because I couldn't visit him. I really didn't know. He really couldn't answer the phone. So I didn't know what happened. I just had to rely on their reports. So but he ended up coming out of it. I was surprised at that because I thought in his state, I thought he was kind of fragile. So, I was kind of prepared for the worst at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So he came out of that where so yeah, we're in 2022, around 2022. So
and then he eventually passes. So for the listeners to find out. So talk about how we got there, what led up to that, and just kind of what that experience was like.
Yes. So eventually, so when he wasn't getting out of bed, of course, that's going to cause its own problems. So I kind of tried to reason with him, hey, Dad, you know what happens when you don't get out of bed? Yeah, I know, is what he says.
He doesn't know because we don't reason anymore.
Yeah. So he says he doesn't know, right? I mean, he says he knows, but I'm like, but you're not getting out of bed. I do everything to try to coax him. But I'm seeing, okay, there's something going on. The nurse of the home is telling me, oh, he's depressed. I don't necessarily buy that as, the reason. I think that it's an easy way to explain how someone is, but I'm like, he has dementia, so he's maybe not necessarily depressed. So I don't know. I was told that a lot, and he was on antidepressants, but it still wasn't changing the way he was. So fast forward, he's not getting out of bed. Months go by.
Okay.
Months go by. He doesn't get out of bed. The day arrives where he can't get out of bed. So I would say that was the top of the mountain of the slippery slope. He couldn't get out of bed. So, months go by, and then so I say, well, he needs a little more care. Let me move him to memory care. Moved him to memory care. Now, what I didn't expect in memory care is sort of a free fall. So, you have other memory care patients who don't know where their room is. They don't really, they're not, it's all a host of, 10 other patients who really don't know where they are. They don't know how to navigate.
Everybody in memory care has cognitive issues. So everybody's not remembering why they're even in memory care.
Right. Or that they know why they're there. And I mean, might I add, there were younger people there too.
Yeah.
So,
just the whole gamut.
Yeah, it was people maybe like 50s, 60s in there as well. So, and they were a little more nimble. So, what happened was people were in and out of his room, things are missing. They're not allowed to have certain things. So, so this, even though he had closer and better care in terms of like people being close by, it was not necessarily the best environment for a person who were entering their dying phase, which I recognize it now, but at the time I didn't know it was so close. So he couldn't get out of bed. So now at this point, he needs a lot of help. He needs help getting out the bed. He needs help with everything. At one point, about 4 months into being in memory care, I see that, he's sicker than usual, laying around. I called the nurse at the facility and, not the one that works there. They have another nurse who's on staff. Call her and she sends in x-rays for him. Looks at x-rays. He has double pneumonia. We're sending him out to the hospital. So this is around May of 2023. So sends him out to the hospital. This is the point where the hospital says he doesn't have pneumonia. He has a little bit of aspiration and, aspiration pneumonia. So he doesn't have double lung pneumonia. He just has a little bit of aspiration. And I'm like, hey, this is the point where I say, hey, can you check for a UTI? He doesn't have a UTI. He doesn't have that. So, we're going to prepare to send him back to the facility. I said, no, let's check for that. And then basically I had to convince him to check for the UTI. So he also had that. They admitted him from then. And at that point, I thought it was going to be over very soon because he couldn't really swallow and he just wasn't, it's like he wasn't a part of this world, but he was, in the hospital. So you're in the right place. Okay. So after they tell me that they're going to give him a swallow test, I'm like, okay, this is when they tell me that he can only eat a puree diet, so that happens. The next day I come back, he has a full plate of food in front of him, and they say, "Oh, he passed the swallow test with flying colors." So now I'm confused because
Right. A minute ago, he couldn't swallow.
he couldn't swallow. So, long story short, he could only swallow for that minute. He ends up not being able to swallow in over the long term. And then, he goes back to the home after a while. And first day back at the home, he falls out of bed.
Mm.
I call hospice after that. And so he got admitted to hospice at this time.
Okay, so let's talk about hospice, because a lot of people don't even understand what is hospice. They think it's a place. I get that a lot. They're like, okay, well, we need to take her to hospice, or we need to send him to hospice. So talk about what hospice is, because I'm assuming at this point you guys have done some research, or you've talked to someone and you've gotten some understanding of what hospice is. So for those who don't know, explain to them what hospice is and how did you guys get there?
Yeah. So from my research, earlier in his disease, I knew that hospice is what you can turn to at end of life. But there's certain things that go along with that I didn't necessarily know, which include like, stuff like going to the hospital is not necessarily an option. Now that's what I was most interested in when I enrolled him in hospice. So hospice is basically, instead of treating a disease, you are letting the disease take its natural course and making the patient comfortable. So my decision was that, I no longer wanted to treat the disease. I didn't want to end up in the emergency room. I just wanted to make him comfortable. He obviously couldn't really swallow, but he could a little bit, you know. So he I looked around. So that's important. You don't have to go with whatever the home recommends. You can look around, shop around for hospices and who you get along with and who you like how they move. Ask the people in the home, even like the workers, which hospice do you like? Because they gave several recommendations. So I would say before anyone goes into that, to interview different hospice agencies that offer these services and find which one you like. But hospice, what they provided was basically comfort care. They made sure my dad was comfortable. They take over giving the supplies, getting the supplies for him. And you have a team. So now you have an end of life team. So you have a nurse, you have a doctor that's on their staff, you have a CNA, and then you have someone who does and comes do their bathing. Some hospices have like music ministry, or they have various resources that make the patient comfortable. So that's what I was
chaplain who come in, talks about faith. They talk about like what the phases of death are, and then even offer grief services for the families after the person has transitioned.
Yes, and it's also for the family as well. So it's for the patient and for the family.
So you get all this. All these people have now joined into this. You've just made the decision to get hospice involved. But prior to hospice, it was just kind of you calling the facility, you navigating, you going to the doctor, you advocate. It was all on Kim. It was Kim having to really do all the things.
Right. And so yeah, it was me there every day. As I saw he was getting sicker, I started going daily, to make sure that first my face was seen, but making sure that he got they got the face of the person, who was going to check to make sure that everything was okay and that he was getting changed. At this point, I put a camera in the room, which was, a highly controversial move from the point of the home. But I had to put that there for when I wasn't there, that I could see him and see that things were going okay. He was still able to respond to me. He would say, yes, I'm okay, stuff like that in the beginning. But yeah, I put a camera in the room when I saw that he was just too feeble to navigate. So, which that brought its own things. But I could kind of just watch him at all times. They recorded. So I would say any home that doesn't let you do that would be, suspicious to me, because if you're taking care of a loved one, you should be able to see what they're doing. So.
Totally makes sense. So then hospice comes. Now you got some helpers. So talk about what that hospice phase of things is like.
So hospice is, at first it's an intake process. You're sort of getting used to the team. So they might have a bathing nurse that comes a couple of times a week, 2 to 3 times a week. You'll get maybe an RN that visits, depending on the need, they visit a couple of times a week. Another nurse might come and make sure that, the patient is doing okay. So for me, it moved kind of fast. So he got enrolled, say, June of 2023. And I would say by August, he had passed in August. So I was expecting my tenure with hospice would be more along the 6 month marker, but the nurse did try to come in and say, I don't know, it looks like he's kind of in the beginning here, so she would visit often. The main nurse would visit maybe once or twice a week, and then just make sure that he was okay with the drugs. He was pulling himself out of bed. So that's the reason I actually got the camera, because I'm like, how is he ending up out of the bed? But
And no one to really answer your question on that.
yeah. So,
And let me just point out for people who don't know, because Kim said she was expecting the full 6 months. What she's referring to is oftentimes when somebody is going, or they say going into hospice, but again, it's not a physical place. But you have a doctor who says, yes, this person is likely to only live for the next 6 months. And at the 6 month mark, they can go back to that doctor, or they can go back and say, is this person going to continue to live beyond that? But typically, this is where the trained professionals are saying that the likelihood is this person will only have 6 months left to live. And that's when you can make the decision if you want to bring in some hospice resources. So that's what she's saying. I thought I would have the full 6 months.
Right. So yeah, and so they would come on a regular basis. And then so toward the end, so it started with him in the swallow thing again. So it came, like, he was in the hospital in May. It came up then, and then he was okay. They started pureeing his food, and making it easier for him to eat. But he was withdrawing, so he wasn't really communicating back. He wasn't doing much talking. They would kind of, add some drugs in there. They added Ativan, which I wasn't really crazy about in the beginning, but I saw that he was agitated. And then he started to contract. His body started to contract. So, which was very scary to see. So just one leg in particular would start to contract, and he seemed to be in pain. So they introduced morphine. So, which is very controversial, I think, from, the regular person standpoint, but I can tell it helped with my dad's pain. So he was in a certain amount of pain. So at that point, it becomes true comfort care where they're administering these pain meds. And then, so he was on morphine for a couple of weeks, and then they had to keep increasing the dose, which then he went into an actively dying phase. So, which I wasn't all the way aware of, but he kind of just couldn't swallow anymore. So, that's where we ended up.
And so through all of this, were you given at least the option of talking to grief counselors or transit people to help you explain or understand the transition in the different phases?
I think that the hospice was that, but I think they were kind of reading signs for me. I looked like I kind of understood, but I didn't know it was that close. So they probably didn't really know that I wasn't completely in tune with, oh, hey, he's in the last few days. So, but the hospice was there every day. So that was a clue. So my particular hospice, I think that they just kind of thought that I understood that he was in his final days, which he was giving all of the signs were there. But, I think from a subconscious standpoint, I think that I didn't necessarily want to witness those stages. So I think that it was more so that, because I saw everything textbook that they said would happen was happening with him. So I would say part of it was my choice of not really wanting to be a part of, or witness that, to have it etched in my mind. So
And I think that especially that piece, it's different for everybody.
Mhm.
What you manage, because again, you're still working, you're still doing
Yep.
things, still, outside of taking care of your dad. You are multifaceted. So
Mhm.
this is one thing that was going on in your life, and how you deal with it personally is so different for everyone.
Yeah.
How involved they want to know in that
Mhm.
last phase versus I want to remember the person maybe at a different phase of this. And so
Right.
I'm choosing to actively not necessarily be as engaged at this phase. Thank you so much, Kim. I mean, child. And now I told you we got to do a third part because we didn't even talk about how you became my client. None of has led up to how you and I even met.
Right.
So we got to talk about that. And in going through all of this with your dad, what did that lead you to do? So guys, part 3. Y'all gonna have to catch us on the third part. We're gonna give y'all just because I can't leave it there. I mean, we gotta now give them some active to-dos. We gotta tell them what they should be thinking about in their life. So tune in for the third part. All right, guys. Until next time.
Thanks for joining us this week on Black Parents Aging. Check out our Facebook group at Black Parents Aging, where we go live to answer your questions. For more info on today's topic, check out the show notes on our website, srlawgrp.com. If you know someone who could benefit from today's episode, please share a link to the show. Subscribe to the show to catch new episodes and leave a review. Until next week.